Awesome. So I know a couple minutes past the hour here. I'm going to go ahead and just kind of get things kicked off. Hello, everyone. Happy Hanukkah to those that celebrate. I know that starts today. As we were kind of wrapping up 2023, I thought a very timely format and conversation, for our quarterly check-in was to have Gale Crosley, strategic growth consultant, recently again named top 100 most influential by Accounting Today. Join us over the next hour. Very much a fireside chat format for today. I've got a list of some questions. Happy to answer anybody questions here when it comes to growth. What are other firms doing? What are we seeing across the profession and the industry? Before diving into that, just quick three things on my end. We wrapped up Winning Ways. I know many of you were there about 3 weeks ago. We focused all of that on culture. We'll have our recap come out early next week. I had a total of 107 individuals attend, about 62 different firms, very meaningful conversations. I thought it was a really nice format. Going into 2024, part of that, we do our reunion. We're going to shift it up a little bit next year in how we do the reunion, make it a little bit more integrated into the event, a little bit more time sensitive versus an extra day and a half, might be an extra day going forward. This past year's reunion, we had David Wurzbacher, the CEO of Ascend, join us for 2 hours. We had Mark Burnett from LBMC join us for 2 hours, as well as Alan Colton, Russell Shapiro, and obviously, the rest of us. We had about 20 people attend, but we do plan to make some updates around that. It's looking like it'll either be the last week of October or the first week of November going into 2024. I know some of you and some of your growth leaders have attended Digital Deep Dive in the past. That's going to be April 3rd and 4th in Atlanta. So we're really excited about that event. We've already got about a third of that sold out already. It's our third year doing that event, really focused on driving demand, very focused on firms that are progressive, or really focusing on digital at the core. And then the last announcement is boot camp, just the dates for 2024. So we've got about 8 people signed up for our cohort in May, 3 people in October. May is obviously a little bit more of an aggressive cohort. Our graduating cohort was 12 attendees. The new cohort that started in October this past year, a couple of weeks ago, it feels like it was yesterday, had that class with 12 individuals as well. So it's going really, really strong. We're up to 145 in the community and continuing to see that evolve. So if anybody has any questions or opportunities for that, obviously Gary and I are always appreciative of it. So I want to go ahead and get started. That's all the updates I had on my end for today. Gale, how are you?
Great. How are you? David
Fantastic.
and I at Digital CPA, and we're both jet lagged, but
Yeah.
we got our bells on.
Made it back. Well, I know we got a chance to hang out there for a couple days. Winning Ways, I know you were a part of as well. So it's kind of been great to share some of the conversations that we've seen over the last couple weeks. Ask Gale to join us today. Very fireside chat, oriented. At any point, if anybody has any questions, top of mind topics that you've been thinking about going into 2024 planning, what firms did in 2023. Answer, raise your hand, speak up, drop it in the chat. I'm happy to facilitate that. I know Gale and I kind of came up a little bit, in terms of content-wise, some topics that we're hearing or some questions that we're hearing that we're going to cover as part of it, but really wanted to use this time, in that capacity. So, Gale, as we kick off, I know you and I had a lot of time together the last couple of weeks, a lot to talk about. Before we do that, you want to just kind of share a little bit about your background, how you became a strategic growth consultant and kind of some of the things you're doing today.
Sure, thank you. A number of you have heard me talk before, so you might go to sleep for this portion of it and wake up later. But basically, I started my career as a CPA with Arthur Andersen and Price Waterhouse in audit. After a few years, I pivoted entirely into technology, and I spent about 20 years there. 12 with IBM, and then another decade with venture capital-backed startups. When the dot-com bust happened, there was pretty much nothing left over here in the technology world. And I said, basically, I know how to grow companies from startup all the way up to very large. And perhaps there might be a market that could use this information. So I use my own methods to identify that the CPA profession was had really good market conditions, and as a result started this. And I, over the past 22 years, have worked with almost 500 firms, CPA firms. And about 3 or 4 years ago, I started working with technology, accounting tech companies as well. So the accounting tech companies are, we've got fish jumping in the boat over, in CPA land here, but the accounting tech companies are wandering around trying to figure out where the fish are. So they've got a very different set of needs for my services than the CPA firms right now. But nonetheless, it all has to do with strategic organic growth.
Awesome. Well, let's dive right in. And I think the big question that I really want to start off with and thinking about, just what 2022, 2023 look like, starting in 2021, obviously, bellies are very full these days, and that might change. But why do we need to be thinking about discussing or talking about strategic growth when the reality is we are so resource constrained today? And I think that's a conversation you hear a lot about, I hear a lot about, and I think it's important we talk about it today.
Yeah, great. Thank you. So because we're leaders in our firms, we're supposed to be having an eye on the future and steering the ship in the right direction. And the future is not what we are experiencing today. It is what we are going to experience in the future. So if we get sucked into all of our mental energy, focused in on today's problems, we will have none to really focus on what's down around the corner or down the road. And the reality is that this is just a snapshot of a moment in time. If you take a look at the last 33 years in our profession, and you look at the year-over-year percent growth rate from year to year, it went as low as -1% in 2010 to as high as 14% in 2023. And so it looks like a roller coaster. The key thing here is for you to keep one eye on today's business challenges and one eye on the future. And in the future, the organic growth is going to look really different. It's going to have a different mix of services, resource deployments, actually who is actually doing the work. We're going to have a bunch of robots doing a bunch of the work. And so we've got to be prepared for the inevitable that the growth, organic growth is going to slow down. And if we use generally accepted growth principles, regardless of whether the markets are really flush or they're really thin, then we'll always be able to sustain our growth rate in a strategic way.
So, just kind of thinking about that a little bit deeper. I mean, I know there's certain times you run into, challenges within the firm, leaders that aren't always growth oriented today. They're struggling to find capacity. Any recommendations or thoughts that you have when it comes to, managing partner or a leader, on how we confront those or start addressing, where to invest our resources going forward? Do we have to be niche focused? But just realizing that, we're running into some obstacles or roadblocks with people that we need to be growing, but just don't have the ability to figure out how to overcome that.
Yeah. So the key thing, David, is to create leaders of growth and not just doers of growth. So when you create leaders of growth, the leaders are responsible for the strategic direction and financial health of whatever the business unit is that they have. And the business unit is typically an industry or a service line. The firms that really struggle the most are the ones that don't have those leaders formalized from stem to stern in the organization, so that they have a formal structure and level of responsibilities for people who are always responsible for keeping their eye on the business as a business, kind of like presidents of business units or subsidiaries within a company. The president of a business unit within a company keeps their eye on, good times and bad times, how the business is going, and they don't mortgage the future by shutting down the sales department,
Right.
Or vice versa, right? I mean, it's like craziness, because in corporate America, we wouldn't be doing this. But over here, if we have a bunch of individual book of business, tactical people who are generalists, a lot of them, then we don't have any formal organizational structure to grapple with doing this. And as a result, we get sucked in, and with the occasional, might have a structure of some sort, but if it isn't very strong and you don't have, a football team of leaders lined up, but just a bunch of, individual golfers and the occasional leader, well, then that's the problem. Okay.
Sure. And before we talk about the number one problem being capacity and a little bit about what you're seeing there and the importance around that, are you seeing any trends going into 2024 in terms of where firms are focused on building out niches or service lines, kind of across the country?
Yeah, the only thing that I'm seeing is a complete absence of future think. Okay. I mean, that's the trend, right?
Yeah.
You could be out here beating the drum, kind of like, like other consultants out here, which are saying, remember the future, just remember it. But it's the clients that I'm working with right now, by the way, it really is reflective of my practice and what is it that who is it that's talking to me these days? It used to be in the past that I talked to the firms that were I'll call A+ to C-. So on strategic growth, some of them were late to the party, don't know if they want to do it, having problems with accountability, et cetera, et cetera. The firms that I work with now, almost to a firm, are the ones that are the best, because the A+ firms, they don't ever mortgage the future. They don't ever say, well, I'm too busy. They just don't do that. So they're the ones that I'm working with the most. But the rank, the average firm, not so much anymore, because they get sucked in to whatever they're doing, and that's why they're average.
So when you talk about the kind of, average and high performing, we know that, capacity has to grow. And one of those levers is around outsourcing, right? Offshoring, if you will. And so how do you see firms, kind of being successful, or when they fail with offshoring, and why is it so critical for going forward?
Got it. So there are two levers that are pretty significant to strategic growth right now, and offshoring is one and tech is the other. And it's not because they are immediately impacting strategic growth. I mean, when you divide a firm or a company down the middle, you have the driving demand side and the fulfilling demand side, and I live on the driving demand side. Outsourcing and technology is living right now, a lot of it on the fulfilling demand side, right? But the reality is that in both cases, if you take a look, let's take outsourcing first, and then we'll go into tech. If you take a look at outsourcing and take a look at the x-axis is human elbow grease, like direct staff, and it's from our direct staff versus outsourcing. Well, today, or in the past, it's been, all of the insourcing, if you will, I'll call it. And this is going down, 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 down. So that the outsourcing piece of it is becoming more and more relevant. And what that does is it allows you to free up your organization so you can focus in on innovation and new services and advisory services and all the things that you need to be focused in on. So that's why outsourcing is so critical. And the same thing can be talked about with tech. Back in the 1890s, when we started as a profession, if it's the human that's doing it versus the technology that's doing it, it was the human at 100%. And now it's going down like this. So that great big white space there in each of these curves has to do with freeing up capacity so that we have the bandwidth, so that we can become leaders of growth, so that we can design new innovations, so we can get into advisory services. So you can't get into outsourcing or technology innovation fast enough on the fulfilling demand side in order to impact the driving demand side. And therefore, if you're hesitant about either one of these, you really are hurting your firm in terms of the ability to grow strategically in the future.
Are you seeing good adoption with practice leaders, growth leaders when it comes to offshoring? Are you seeing, anybody? I mean, I know people are tripping over their feet. We know onesies and twosies can be hard. Teams that are building 5 or 10 people at a time offshore seem to be more successful going forward. But any tips that you've seen when it comes to, supporting that growth capacity when it comes to offshoring?
Yes, and one of the big issues is that to the first part of your question, which is, am I seeing more adoption? The answer is yes. However, it took us 10 years to get here. We were all hugging the tree and saying we ain't going there for whatever the reason was.
Right.
And it became so obvious to the early movers, like the big four, that this is what the future was going to look like. And so what happened is that we don't have a choice, right? We had to get to the point where we didn't have a choice. And so now that we've gotten to that point, now the vendors are starting to come in. We used to have 2 or 3 vendors. Now we've got 30 or whatever the number is, a lot of them, right? And unless you are involved in an association that has pre-vetted all these vendors and done the shopping trip for you, the big challenge du jour is to look at 30 vendors and say, oh my God, my head hurts. I'm going to be shopping for the next year and a half for the right vendor. And what I've told so I would say, if you can hitchhike onto either your association work that has vetted out all these vendors and positioned them appropriately in the market, and where they really are positioned, or another firm, you're going to be 3 steps ahead. If I were a managing partner now, I would not be going out on a shopping trip for these vendors, because they all sound the same. They all look the same. They all have similar. They all have similar sounding, things. But the reality is, and I've been consulting with a couple of them lately and saying, listen, if you want to get the business, you've got to do a competitive mapping, right, of market position of X and Y axis and where all the others are and where you are. Because otherwise you're going to be in there slugging at it. And if I were a buyer, I would say, I'd say, I want you to show me on a piece of paper, show me where you are versus everybody else. And that will get the conversation really granular more quickly than not. And they'll either be able to tell you or they won't. And if you hear the same thing from them as everybody else, then it's like, no. By the way, my husband used to be in the staffing and outsourcing business for a few decades. So I know more about this market than most. I lived it at the dinner table. So come at me and say, well, we do it with somebody who, manages the job properly. And I'm like, just wait a minute here. Just wait a minute. Don't be trying to Zoom me. And so if I were a buyer, they, thank God they say Gale Crosley isn't a buyer, because the sell cycle would be a year and a half long, right? So.
Well, so what's interesting, and to your point with offshoring that I'm seeing, is they're getting more niched, right? It used to be, somebody like a Sapro or Mercosi, been around for a long time. They were everything to anybody. There wasn't a lot of competition. Now, to your point, there's 30, 40 of them, and they're really getting more niche in what they do. Some do a pod model. Some do, the ability to hire, type of model. Some of them are bridging the gap with technology. Some specialize in QBO versus zero. And so anything that you've noticed, kind of playing off of that when it comes to professionals getting more ingrained, into, not one partner is going to necessarily, be the solution. You might need 2 or 3. Are you seeing firms successfully do this? Just have one partner, or look at 2 or 3, one for audit, one for tax, one for CAS? Curious, any opinions there?
Every business model looks a little different to me, and there's no theme in particular. The only theme is that they're having a hard time articulating what you just described, which is what I'm describing, your market positioning and your differentiation. I will tell you that when I first, and I do this exercise a lot with my clients, because when plain vanilla ice cream looks like plain vanilla ice cream, you're going to have to be the one to tell them, and to show them that you have, your Neapolitan or your chocolate or whatever. And when I first opened my doors, I actually had a consultant help me with not first open, I was in probably year 2, where is everybody else and where are you? And where should you be? And that was actually the most significant piece of my early strategy development, is to find is to be able to articulate in a picture where everybody else was, and here's the market hole, and that's where you need to go, right? And that exercise, now if I had them instead of CPA leaders on our Zoom today, if I had them on, this is what I would be telling them. So I would say to you, God bless you as the buyer who's trying to sort through the morass of all these options, because I know it's a big shopping trip.
When you talk about growth leaders in firms, and I want to talk just kind of, is that part of their role? Are they responsible for working with the offshoring companies and making sure that the services they're selling are the ones that they can execute on? Are there other people that need to be involved in that process within the firm?
So the industry and service line leaders, when you think about what their role is, they're responsible for the strategic direction and financial health of the business unit. So the answer is yes. And it turns out, therefore, that their resource deployment strategy will be different from, the next leaders, basically. And so we'll have, it would be very natural for them to have different strategies and therefore different executions relative to their business unit. Yeah.
Making sure they're comfortable with this process, and that goes back to technology. If you don't have the right technology in place, process is hard. And how do you scale when, you're trying to leverage offshoring?
Absolutely.
So just kind of thinking about on the service line leader side, I know a lot of times we're trying to think about the leaders of the future, and we talked a little about going into the future. Any tips or ideas on how we can identify other leaders, within the firm that can contribute to strategic innovation going forward and empowering them to be able to do so?
Yeah, the two other leaders that are really crucial here is the marketing leader and the technology leader that you have in your firm. Because what's happening out in the market is that we're requiring to operate at a much higher level of sophistication as it relates to growth than we ever were. I mean, it was good enough to have the banker breakfast, the lawyer lunch, to have generalists, to have tactical approaches like that, and to be individual contributors. But because of the private equity dynamic in particular, and there are other dynamics, but the PE dynamic is pretty significant as it relates to how it's changing the neighborhood, so to speak. And as a result, we need to be thinking about how these other leaders would, in fact, be transformed. So I'll start off with the marketing leader first. And the marketing leader really needs to get itself transformed into a job that's a chief growth officer job. And the chief growth officer job is responsible for the strategic direction and of growth and supporting that revenue growth in the firm. So they're operating at a C level, at a strategy level, which a lot of our marketing people are not. And often the chief growth officer may have some of a marketing background, but may not. And that's why I'm finding CGOs coming in from the corporate world. And a lot of them are and I was a chief growth officer back in the day, but I had the perfect background for one, which was a third was marketing, a third was quoted sales, and a third was product management, right? It was a perfect background. So when I'm helping them hire CGOs, I'm looking for evidence that they have experience and knowledge of those three components of strategic growth. So that's one. The second one is the chief innovation officer, or the non-C level version of that would be the product manager, somebody who's responsible for product management, which is the ideation, the definition, the development, and the execution and successful commercialization of new services. Your CIO, which is the chief information officer, is generally in the back room. And in the back room, they're working with infrastructure platforms, CRM, practice management, and the like. The chief innovation officer, however, is market facing and looking at what of the data analytics, AI, generative AI, RPA, on and on and on, and all those technologies, embedding those into our services and driving advisory services from those. And that is a very different job. And a lot of firms, especially small ones, don't have the chief innovation officer, in which case I recommend that they go to some of the consultants that are out here that can be that for-hire chief innovation officer consultant that can be brought in and help them with vetting out different technologies and so forth. So those are two pretty key positions as we relate to the leadership lineup.
So I think I couldn't agree with you more on either one of them, especially like CGO wise. And I see some people that have directors of marketing and questioning, do they get elevated to the C-suite? Are they a number two more than they're a number one? And then also seeing a lot of different roles of what a chief growth officer is, was, and has been. And I don't know if that's starting to evolve also. I think you outlined very well sales, marketing, and product, really fall under CGO. I see some that have CGOs only focusing on M&A and local relationships and coaching or training their people. Others I know are starting to make them more revenue or, metric oriented. As firms start, looking at that, if they don't have one already or are trying to get that to evolve, what are some of the pitfalls that hinder the success of those roles?
Probably the main is assuming that the chief marketing officer can become the CGO.
Yeah.
And not having the conversation with her, it's usually a her, it's occasionally a guy, as to what do you want to do with your role and with your career. Some chief marketing officers don't want that role. Right. And they really, really good at the marketing role, the chief marketing role, and the visibility, the credibility, the relevance of us in the market, and all the things that are surrounding that. But they didn't necessarily go to school to become a revenue driver, and they may not want it. Other ones, however, grab onto it and say, yes, I want it, but only if there's an understanding of what it is and what they want to do. Will it really work? The other thing is that if you go out and try to find a chief growth officer in CPA land, well, we don't have them over here.
Right.
So let's not pretend like we do. We don't have them. They are all over corporate America, especially in the technology space, where you have to really have a sharp axe in order to grapple with the speed of the market that we had in tech and still do. So chief growth officers are going to come out of technology. They're going to come out of technology consulting, right? Firms. Which is, by the way, my last real job was in a tech consulting firm, about a $250 million consulting all around technology. And this is where they hang out. So we've got to get outside of the profession to get the CGOs in here that are going to really enable us to work at the pace that private equity is driving our profession. We've been in the slow lane, relatively slow lane, relative to PE and tech and the corporate world. The best of the corporate world, the fastest of the corporate world, we're being forced into the left-hand lane. And as a result, we got to have people that are used to driving in the left-hand lane, and they're going to come from corporate and more cutting-edge industries in corporate like tech.
Before we talk a little bit more about PE and M&A for a brief second, just playing on the CGO role, do you see when those firms that are adopting that methodology or strategy, does marketing work hand in hand with the CGO? Do they work under the CGO? Maybe that just depends on the firm's structure at that given time as you guys start, they start adapting that type of, trajectory. But any thoughts on that?
Yeah, they should report to the CGO.
Yeah.
And as we start developing sales organizations, which we're going to be forced to do, then we're going to have the chief sales officer or the vice president of sales or whatever reporting in there. And then we're going to have the product management function reporting in there. Now, when you get to the point where you have a chief innovation officer, it could very well be that product management goes over under a chief innovation officer. But for now, for many firms, that product management function, which is the innovation function and supporting, driving new innovation in our services and supporting the industry and service line leaders to get that done, that staff position naturally fits into the repertoire of the chief growth officer.
Yeah, thank you. That's super helpful because I know that comes up a lot, in my world too. So you mentioned PE and M&A, a couple times, how that's going to be impacting the way we need to be thinking about strategic growth going forward. We had David Wurzbacher as a guest about 6 or 9 months ago here, and at the time they had 2 firms. I think today they're up to 14 firms and doing over 100 million in revenue now. And we're obviously seeing more activity and more acquisitions happening. Your part-time controller, got acquired by private equity, a week or two ago, nonprofit space. What are 2 or the 3 things that, PE is really ultimately doing to make us really, assess and make sure we're forward thinking when it comes to strategic growth for our firms going forward?
Probably, David, the number one thing is they're forcing us into this fast lane. And when you think about what we've been about, and I caveat this by saying we weren't solving problems we didn't have. I mean, we weren't on the shoulder of the road, okay? We were in the right-hand lane, but it was good enough. And we've been a relatively slow-moving relative to these corporate environments profession, but that's because accuracy has been far more important than speed. We better get it right, or the stakes are high. We could end up in jail or someplace. So we had to be first and foremost accurate. We've been compliance driven, so the calendar drives us. We are not used to initiating, and I use tech a lot because it's the best of the corporate world in terms of best practices for growth. If the calendar is driving us, then we're not driving us. Well, over in the corporate world, we're initiators. We initiate activity. The calendar is what's doing that, and as a result of that, we are respectful of the calendar's pace, and we've got a situation where we've got commoditization in our core services, and we're grappling with that, and probably the other thing, and I'm going to compare this therefore to the PE world, is that we have owners of the business who also work in it. I mean, this is very unusual for corporate. We don't have over in tech and other places. The owners don't work in the company except for maybe the founders, but we have employees. So that means that we, every single time we invest $1 in a CPA firm, is $1 that isn't going into the partner's pocket. And this is really different too, because it puts a whole spin on how we invest. Well, in comes PE and the checkbook's open, right? And all of a sudden we've got, not at the firm level, but at the market level, right? We've got all this money coming in. And as a result, and there's an expectation of speed, right? And, get this money, go deploy it, and get yourself growing and profitable. Right. Left lane looks like. And in addition to that, oh, by the way, the partner model is a very slow moving decision model. We're down with, 20 partners sitting there and talking about the color of the paint in the bathroom, and someone wants it blue and someone else wants it green. And they're like, get enough already, take money and make big decisions with it. So that means that the organizational structure of a corporate, everybody has a boss, and we delegate down in a very efficient manner to, various people and so forth. Decisions are made very quickly. As a result of that, we compare where we are with the sophistication of growth pre-private equity, and then after all this private equity and other non-private equity money is coming in, and you're going to see things like, and this is a sophistication level I'm talking about, strategic leaders of growth, industry and service line leaders who are, it's a very well thought out framework. Their compensation is tied not just to their book of business, but to driving that business unit, et cetera. We're going to have these chief growth officers. We're going to have really strong firm-wide pipeline opportunity, pipeline management processes. We're going to have a professional sales force in many firms. We're going to have a well built out product management function. And oh, by the way, this very, let me bash the client experience issue for a moment. The client experience issue, you know, has trumped the main issue, which is a key client initiative. Client experience from, you know, somebody who's spending $2,500 with you to $2.5 million should be really different. So I say, if I were going to start a client experience program in my firm, I'd start a large account or a key client program and take the largest clients and the most strategically significant, put a fence around it, put a number on it, and say, we want to drive, you know, X amount of dollars from this client set. Now let's talk about how we're going to fashion a program to do that. And so in corporate America, key client programs are it's just part of what we do, right? But over here, except for the larger firms, nobody's even heard of it. They wouldn't even, you know, I do a lot of work in my clients to get it set up and get it going and getting revenue being driven from those large clients. While everybody's talking about pruning out the bottom, what I'm talking about is strengthening up the top. The bottom will fall out as you need it to, but if you prune out the bottom, but you don't have a key client program, then you're still not where you need to be.
Yeah. I think those are all really important areas. And I know, like, you know, when you talk to somebody like a David Wurzbacher, you know, they're also very focused on talent, you know, and bringing a lot of people at the talent side and the HR side and really focusing on that conversation. We talked a little bit earlier on advisory services, you know, and the importance and a lot of firms, you know, shifting towards that focus, building out the services, upselling, cross-selling to that top list that you identified, you know, just a few minutes ago. How do you see some of these services growing throughout the profession today? You know, where are firms at with that kind of process, and you know, maybe some pointers or takers that we can focus on going forward?
Got it. So I would tell you that there's a lot more talk than there is action.
Yeah.
There has been for many years here. It's not that we don't know that we need to do it. The question is, how do we get it done? And we have to stare the business problem in the face and realize that we are firms full of accountants. And accountants are totally different from consultants. And having been a practicing CPA and now a practicing consultant, the differences are so significant that and a lot of accountants don't want to be. They might want to be consultative, right? And they have to be consultative at some level, but they don't really want to be consultants. And if we're going to drive large amounts of advisory services, then we're going to drive large amounts of consulting. And so therefore, that's the conundrum. There is an ability to take and drive consulting advisory services with who we have and what we have, as long as it starts at the numbers and analysis level. So a perfect place to start is data analytics, right? And FP&A. But the further that we get from that foundation, the more we're going to have to just port in talent from outside and call it what it is, which is we're going to have these people that, you know, that we can't grow up through the food chain. The one thing about advisory services that is going to get it there faster is the realization that it has to start with industry. It has to. When I'm helping firms transform into high levels of advisory services, we go out and we start with that, and the technology piece is so significant to it that we go out and find business use cases in each individual industry specifically for that industry and come back with something totally different than the next industry. And I'll give you an example. I was working with a firm in Virginia many years ago, and each of their industry leaders were tasked to go out and find the business use cases for technology/advisory services in their industries. And I'll never forget that one of them came back and said, we have a potential for artificial intelligence in the audit. because I'm finding out that there's a big problem in skilled nursing facilities. So he had the audit leader and the healthcare leader were out there looking together, and revenue reimbursement is a perfect opportunity for the use of AI for large data sets as it relates to the general ledger accounts around revenue reimbursement. And so we were able to craft a scenario where we went into the audit and talked to the client about coming back later and do an advisory project on these revenue reimbursement accounts. And that part of the audit, we were going to focus there. And then we came back with part B and sold the advisory project. Well, meanwhile, over in construction, what we found is there were two issues over there. One was job safety, and the other was cybersecurity. And so we went down the path with those two, with two completely different initiatives. They were both advisory services and technology centric and so forth, but that's the way that it's got to happen. And so if you look at my big spreadsheet in the sky with the services, down the rows and the industries across the columns, it's going to be the industries that are pulling the row leader in and saying, let's look at fill in the blank cybersecurity in skilled nursing facilities, construction, real estate, and rather than the rows saying, well, I'm the cybersecurity guy, come one, come all. Which is what's happening in a lot of firms. It's still vanilla ice cream, and it can't be to get your advice services where they need to be.
And I think the thing that plays off of that too is as there's so much consolidation in the top 20 or top 15, right? Going upstream for these mid-market firms, it's leaving this gap between the large firms and the middle market firms that says we can go upstream also, but in order to create more stickiness, we have to have these niche advisory offerings to be able to grow and develop those relationships going forward on the advisory side.
Oh, yeah. So it's critical in the non-very large firms that we understand that in the large firms, it's just they're already often so well developed with their industry centricity that, it's not a major leap forward to grab on and customize advisory services at the industry level.
So I had two final questions on my end, a little bit more high level. Open it up if anybody has any specific topics or questions we didn't cover, or dive deeper into anything we did talk about. But, thinking into 2024, 2025, any areas that you see for future growth that we should really be investigating, researching, looking into as we're developing kind of our strategic growth plan going forward?
Yes, it's interesting. This question is interesting because it's always a different answer depending upon the year that we're talking about. So back 10 years ago, somebody asked me this question and I said there were two. It's CAS and international, period. Every single one of my clients were required to have a CAS strategy and an international strategy. Today, because both of those, of course, are we're all over it. Today, the two that I would recommend, there are two. One is ESG and the other is blockchain.
And ESG, I know, is growing. A lot of firms are starting to focus on, niching it. And I know I heard people speak that, CPAs, our firms have a great opportunity to own that. Otherwise, somebody potentially from another profession or industry has the chance to take a swing at that space.
Yes. I just, in fact, right before I got on with you, I was on with a large firm in the Netherlands that has a well built out ESG initiative. And the reason I was on the call is because I'm always looking for my clients, shopping for them for resources so that we don't have to build stuff from scratch. I mean, they have a whole build out training program, a board strategy program, all the stuff that we're going to want. And ESG is so big. And some of you have heard me talk about my 3 bean jars. If you can envision a PowerPoint with a bean jar that's this big, and then one that's a little bit bigger, and then one that's really this big. So this bean jar is the fiat, the dollars and cents that we've been counting and assuring about for 100 and some years, and then digital assets is bigger. That's going to be even bigger in the future than the fiat jar. And then you have the ESG jar that's huge. Carbon footprints, how many fish are in the North Sea, what's your diversity statistics look like. There's so many beans to count and to be assured, and we are in a perfect position to be the ones to do it.
So just thinking about today's conversation so far, thinking about digital CPA, winning ways, all, culture, governance, all these different topics, advisory services, growth leaders, one or two things from today's conversation, or we should all take away here, all as firm leaders, from your eyes or perspective, and then, after that, open it up for any questions.
Great. If I were a managing partner and the my wheelhouse here is strategic organic growth, what would I be doing? I would be absolutely realizing that private equity is driving our strategic growth approaches and generally up level the sophistication per some of those examples of ways to do that. The second is to get some teeth into the formalization of your strategic growth leadership, because that is the future, and that framework will take you all the way up to a multi-billion-dollar firm, and you're not going to outgrow it. The book of business only model you will outgrow, but you'll never outgrow this. Get yourself committed at whatever level that you can possibly to tech and outsourcing, not only for the fulfilling demand side of your firm, but because that's going to allow you to drive demand by freeing up capacity. And then the fourth thing is an investment in technology, especially generative AI in the short term. I mean, that's, it's obvious. And then the other one is ESG. Those would be.
You mentioned CAS too. 10 years ago, that was your number one thing. Today, there, that had 150 people at Digital CPA. Today, there was 1,200. And obviously, a big part of that conversation was generative AI, and different firms, larger firms, are creating their own platforms like an AskMarkham.ai. A lot of the vendors that talked and spoke about how they're leveraging AI. I'm going to turn it over to the audience and see if anybody has any questions.
So, Gale, if we were to snap our fingers and it's 2030, the year 2030, what's different in 2030 about our overall growth strategy than it is today? And are there any other industries doing what we need to be doing in 2030 today that we can point to and look at?
What was, Myron, what was the second part of your question? Are there any what?
Are there any industries doing what the accounting industry should be doing in 2030, but today that we could point to and look at?
Okay, I'll take that first, and that is without question technology. The technology industry has been the harbinger for the last many, many, many years, and I've touched technology for most of my career, and it's always been the harbinger for the last, in our lifetime. And so that would be the cutting edge. That's where these things start. There may be others, but technology is definitely, in my mind, number one. And then in 2030, the things that will be different. It's interesting. We have two worlds here. And I've never had this question before, so I never thought about it in this way, but we've got the B2B world and the B2C world, the business to business and the business to consumer. And the B2C world is a world that's very, very digital centric in the way that buyers buy, right? So when you buy things, you're sitting in front of your computer and you're buying them off of Amazon and, wherever you're buying them, and you're making decisions about choices in that buying process. I think that the B2B world is going to look more like the B2C world. I think that we're going to have less of the more digitization in the decision process around our B2B decisions. And David and I have had a number of talks about this because some of the first questions I ever asked him when I found out he was a digital expert, I said, what's the average transaction size realistically of somebody who's going to buy something from us off the internet? And it keeps coming down. And so as a result, that whole concept of how do you reach out to buyers, because you know, anybody who's in their 50s and 60s, they're, you know, they're used to, you know, that personal piece. But we're going to have, through Gen AI, we're going to have agents out there. We saw Pascal Finette, who is an incredible futurist, David and I at DCPA, and he talked about, he showed us the window into the future where we're going to have a shopping agent that's going to be a generative AI shopping agent. And you're going to be able to sit there and say, listen, I want a firm that can provide me, fill in the blank, whatever it is, financial planning and analysis around inventory management in my wire cable manufacturing company. Go find one. Go find somebody who can do that for me. Think about that. I mean, just think about that. It's so,
the example Pascal used, and he was fantastic, is he took a pair of shoes. You want to buy the best running shoes for somebody that's 57 years old that runs on the sidewalk. Take that same search, put it into Google, put it into Bard or ChatGPT, and see the difference in results that you get. In Google, it's all sponsorships, right? And in ChatGPT, he's analyzing 5 different shoes and what would be the best one and their price points around each of those shoes that you should purchase. HubSpot came out with a statistic a couple weeks ago that 55% of searches online are going to happen through a Gen AI format versus Google search. So I think your point's spot on there.
Yeah. And we see the examples that Pascal uses in the B2C world, but it's going to be B2B. It's just a matter of time. And so with that in mind, that's where I think we're going to be.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Any other questions, Kevin?
Hi, Gale. Thanks for your comments on the C-suite, chief growth officers, all those things. I was just curious. We have in the Alliance program so many firms between like 5 million, 15, 20 million. With respect to like chief growth officer, even maybe a chief strategy officer, chief culture officer, those kind of roles. Do you see, if you want to be a progressive firm that's focused on the future, should those firms, the 5 to 15 million dollar firms be really, do you see firms that size really hiring those people and making those kind of changes in their structure going forward? Or should they be?
Well, this is going to, I don't know what the word is, self promoting. So I don't mean it to be, but it's just like anything. If you can't hire it full time, then go find something part time that is that resource that you need in order to get the job done, right? Yeah.
And this is a good, I think, just following up on that, and we heard, and I keep referencing it just because, I've learned a lot from David, but when at the reunion 2 weeks ago at Winning Ways and MPB, David talked about the firms they're acquiring, and they're all below $20 million, I think, for the most part, outside of 1 or 2. And the very first strategic hire they're making in every one of those firms is a CGO.
Yeah, absolutely. And when I interviewed the first CGO that they brought in, and she blew my socks off. I mean, it was like, yes, this is what we're needing. Yeah. Yeah.
Any other questions? Gale, this has been an awesome conversation. I know we've got about 2 or 3 minutes left. So I think, obviously good content, good conversation. We'll make sure that we send around your contact information to everybody here today, as well as the recording for the group. So as always, I know tomorrow you're speaking or doing a fireside chat, I think, with 2 of our friends, Alan Colton and Angie Grissom as well. Anybody's open to attend that. Check out Gale's LinkedIn page. I saw it posted on there. Thank you for everybody joining us today. Have a wonderful holiday season. I know you'll be seeing more from us here coming up, what we've got going on in 2024. But without further ado, I'll let everybody enjoy the rest of their afternoon. Thanks, Gale.
Everybody, I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.